raise hand somewhere there, you would be able to, of course, as would like the class to be as engaging and interactive as possible. I think you can also share your link with other members of the public. This class will really be of benefit to a wide variety of people. Of course, the issue of human rights is a very, very topical issue because it affects us alike, especially for most parts of Africa that has its GDP, the national wealth coming from the extractive industry. We're talking about mining, in Nigeria, the oil industry. There's been a lot of regulations and measures to make sure that things are in order, but that there are measures does not mean that we will not run foul of it. And most of these issues affects us as citizens, as residents of many of these areas. One of the stories that come to mind was when I was serving then somewhere in southwest Nigeria, and it was in the oil producing region of the southwest Nigeria. And throughout my stay for 1 year in that region, there was, of course, basically no infrastructure on ground. The only thing you're likely to see is oil rigs and all of that. Every part of the land was entirely polluted up to their water table. You go to the well to try and see if you can fetch water, and it's completely polluted. I mean, you can literally see the water stained, brownish, and all of that. And I mean, this also meant that the people's livelihood is in jeopardy, is in danger. People can't get water to drink, and water would have to be transported from from neighboring communities. And this is just one of several examples. So in this week, I want us to be as vocal about it on our social media. If you can, please just go to your social media to share a message or two about the cause. Yeah, you're welcome, Mustafa from Shokoto. You're welcome, Ruby. You're welcome, Emmanuel. You're welcome, Smith. Rahima, you're welcome. Favor, Cindy from Zambia, you're welcome. Doreen, you're welcome, everyone. Elsie Yasamoa, you're welcome. Like I was saying, please, if you can just spare a few seconds, go on your social media, on your favorite social media, Instagram, LinkedIn, X, Facebook. We have shared the flyers, say something interesting about what you're about to learn, your expectation, and basically, what the public will be getting from you at the end of this course. I'm very excited that our facilitator is on the call, is able to join us. I'll be introducing him in a few seconds, so let's stay tuned. In the meantime, like I said, if you like to say something, I could give us 30 seconds each. If you like to say something about how you're feeling at the moment, about your expectation on the course, on this week's course, about what you're experiencing in relation to this course, please use the raise hand button and let's talk basically. I'm hoping that our interaction will set the tone for this lecture. As usual, we will be sharing the recordings, so not to worry, and also the training material. So yeah, good morning, Ifeanyi. So like I said, our facilitator is on the call, so that we believe that, I'm not sure you have any reason to doubt. So let us just say hi to Ifeanyi. Good morning, Ifeanyi.
Hi, good morning, Mayo. How are you doing today?
I'm amazingly well. Amazingly well. How are you? Good morning.
I'm well. Good morning, and thank you for having me on the call. It's such a privilege and an honor to be speaking to you all this morning on a topic that is close to home, I would say. And yeah, I can't wait to get the ball rolling.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I will be introducing us to Ifeanyi, and just like is our tradition, Ifeanyi would I'll also be introducing Ifeanyi to us. So basically, Ifeanyi, these are great minds from 6 African countries, from Nigeria, Rwanda, South Africa, Zambia, Kenya, and Ghana, and I hope that's up to 6. So, and we are mostly of the student population. Some of us are undergraduate students, postgraduate students. Some of us are, of course, in other are running professional courses. Some of us are in our early careers as climate that is relating to sustainability. And basically, we have a shared goal that we want to know more about this course, about how to effectively communicate climate change, about how to help our countries to stay committed to the Paris Agreement, as said, 2016. Basically, we want to move Africa from where it is to a greener Africa. This is, if I'm in short, right? Ifeanyi Ohanyere is a globally recognized energy professional, sustainability consultant, and impassioned climate leader, renowned for his extensive work in environmental advocacy and corporate sustainability. He currently serves as the project coordinator of Student Energy, committed to nurturing and igniting the next generation to hasten the sustainable energy transition. His track record showcases an exceptional ability to lead initiatives from grassroots campaigns to global strategies, all aiming towards climate awareness and effective action. Ifeanyi's transformative leadership is evident in his efforts beyond the sphere of youth advocacy, extending into reforming business approaches within Nigeria's sustainability section. He possesses a distinguished knack for guiding businesses towards embedding sustainability in their core strategies, which has contributed to his clients garnering both local and international recognition for their outstanding sustainability performance. Having obtained his MBA from the acclaimed Quantic School of Business and Technology, USA, Ifeanyi continues to augment his expertise by pursuing a master's degree in energy engineering from the University of Hull, England. His unyielding dedication. Yeah, if you are impressed, please go ahead, and let's start showing those appreciation. We are actually honored to have Ifeanyi in our midst. Ifeanyi's accolades and achievements are testament to his relentless pursuit of climate action. Recently, he was instrumental in developing the African Youth Sustainability Action Plan, unveiled at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. A proud member of the United People Global Sustainability Leadership Class of 22. He has also represented the younger generation at international platform as a delegate of the United Nations Climate Change Conference 2021 in Glasgow, funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and Sustainable Energy for All. Previously, Ifeanyi participated in the Students Energy Leadership Fellowship 2021, Canada, and the Climate Reality Leaders Cup in 2020, where he was trained by Al Gore, a former Vice President of the United States of America. His extraordinary efforts in the domain of climate change action are a source of inspiration and a call to action to everyone. Thank you very much, Ifeanyi. This is Ifeanyi in just in a very, very small way, but there's more to a facilitator than this. For one, he was the senior colleague where I work here at AC, with a warm applause and ovation and everything you can call it. Let us welcome Ifeanyi to our program, Zero Carbon Africa Impact Fellowship. Ifeanyi, you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you very much. Let's keep jamming those hands. Let's keep showing our love to our facilitator.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayowa, for that humbling introduction. And hello, everybody. Good morning once again. I believe we are mostly in the morning. For those in the afternoon, good afternoon to you as well. I'm happy to hear that we have quite a large reach, 6 African countries represented. And I believe that at the end of this program, we'll have a better understanding of the intersections and the interactions between climate change and human rights. So far, based on my understanding, I'll be following the program, and it's been quite an interesting discourse so far, talking about ESG, the ESG dimensions of climate change, the economic dimensions, also touched on energy, and a couple of other cross-cutting issues. But today, our focus is going to be on human rights. So, Mayowa, is it possible for you to share the slides, please? We'll be using the slides today just as a guide. We'll be using the slides as a guide, but it's more going to be a conversation. So I'm really counting on everyone here to make this session as interactive as possible. So as I'm speaking, if something like piques your interest or there's something you would like to contribute, you could either use the chat function or raise your hand, and as much as time would permit, the opportunity will be given for us to also share our ideas. Because of course we all come from different contexts and have different perspectives on the issues of human rights and climate change. So to kick us off, maybe we could just quickly touch on what climate change is. Probably you all know it already, and maybe all the speakers have said one or two things about climate change, but I think it's interesting or important for us to also touch on it, so we could easily place those interconnections and see how it concerns us. So basically, climate change has to do with the long-term shifts in temperatures and weather patterns. And the reason why it's called climate change, because climate basically has to do with those long-term weather patterns. So when there is a deviation from what is established, what we are used to, then that is where the change is. And of course, the science of climate change is basically the sun rays coming to the earth and provide warming, and there are so many benefits of this sun rays coming in, but then they are reflected back out of the earth's atmosphere. But if they all leave, everything that comes in leaves, the planet would be unstable. In fact, it's going to freeze over. So we have what we call the greenhouse gas, and it works on the principle of the greenhouse effect, and basically providing that blanketing or cover, right, that keeps, thank you very much, Maiwa, that traps some of this heat. And the reason for that is so that the earth would be stable, the climatic systems of the earth would be stable. However, due to the increase of these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, now the trapping effect is heightened and we have more heat than we actually need. And this leads to what we call, or what we know as, global warming, right? So now the global warming is what brings about the undesired effects in the climate, which we refer to as climate change. So these effects could they range from droughts to flooding to irregularities in precipitation patterns to there's a whole lot. Increased temperature in certain places, sea level rise. Some of these things we're definitely going to touch on as we spotlight the conversation on human rights. So this is basically how the science of climate change works, and this is the effect. And many of us are not far removed from the effects of climate change, because climate change, of course, has an effect on every single person in the world. As long as you're on this planet Earth, one way or the other, you can be susceptible to the effects of climate change, although to varying degrees. And those people who live in the global south, or marginalized communities, or vulnerable communities, feel the impacts in a far greater intensity than those who live in the global south, who are somewhat cushioned and somewhat isolated. I use that word advisedly, or I think cushioned would be better, from the full-scale impacts of climate change. So that's basically the science of climate change. Okay. So now, to understand our conversation today, I would like to delve into certain philosophical references that would be important as well for us to understand, to guide our conversation. So when we talk about climate change, one thing is certain: there are different perspectives to the conversation. There are different perspectives, as some of the previous speakers would have highlighted. So you can see climate change from the economics viewpoint, where you begin to consider like the cost and then the benefit approach. What are the costs of climate change? What's the benefit that it's going to bring to you? So I currently live in the United Kingdom, and a few months ago, when I came in, I attended a conference, and it was a wine tasting. We had a wine tasting ceremony, and the host was talking about some of the finest British wines. First started by talking about wines generally, and how, of course, you get really good wines from the south of France, also some in Spain, and that's because of the weather there, or let me say the climate there rather. It's friendly for the production of these grapes that end up being wines, right? And then he said something interesting, which I've not forgotten. He said that with the increased change in the climate of the United Kingdom, the United Kingdom is becoming the climate is becoming favorable for the growing of these grapes, right? So that is the climate changing. And the change in the climate simply means that those who are in the wine producing industry in the United Kingdom stand to benefit. They stand to benefit from that. So now you see that there are so many vineyards that are being planted in the United Kingdom, business begins to boom for them because the atmosphere is now warming and the climate is becoming favorable. But that is just one industry. There are other areas, there are other ways that climate change also affects the United Kingdom. Just last year, we had like a serious heat wave in the United Kingdom, about 40 degrees, and the railway system began to buckle. Transportation was halted. People were staying indoors because of a serious heat wave, right? So that's another effect. So if you're looking at it from a cost-benefit approach, you start looking at, okay, what are the benefits that accrue due to the changing climate? Okay, we see a boom in the wine industry, it's going to start getting more revenue. What are the costs? Economies, the economy begins to shrink because there is less production, there's less movement, people are staying at home, there's more downtime. So you see, this is a way to analyze climate change, looking at it from the economics perspective. You also look at it from the security perspective, and this is what is somewhat political, because there is a multiplier effect that climate change kickstarts, which ultimately leads to insecurity or instability in a country. So when you look at the Sahel region, for instance, let us spotlight the Lake Chad region that's in northern Nigeria. So with the Lake Chad, which has been like vital to the economy of that region, shrinking, and the shrinking of the Lake Chad is due to increased drought in the area. What that means is that the farmers in that region that depend on the water supply, maybe through irrigation and all of that, cannot make as much yield because of the drought. So those people who predominantly were farmers, right, or maybe herdsmen, now have to move or migrate to other regions. And this has been a problem in Nigeria, particularly for some time. These herdsmen begin to move, they become nomadic, and then they go through down south, cutting across farmlands, and their herds eating the crops of maybe those in the middle belt that are farmers. And this now leads to clashes, communal clashes, right? So this is a same security dimension. Also see terrorism, that place becoming a hotbed for terrorism, because those people who were poor and now their source of livelihood taken away from them because they were previously farmers, jihadists and those who are fighting for a cause can easily recruit them, because if they pay them peanuts, they just say, okay, since this is a way of earning a living, no problem, I would work as a terrorist. And that leads to heightened insecurity for the state. So that's another way to look at climate change. Then there's also the ecological approach. And the ecological approach is just focusing and condemning like the human-induced climate change, talking about how our activities have a negative impact on the ecosystems. So you look at biodiversity loss, you look at the great migration, you look at how ecosystems are devastated basically, and you see that these are some impacts of climate change. And these are some ways you can look at it. But then there's the dimension which we want to focus on today is the human rights perspective. And it's an important consideration because human rights are the most fundamental and at the same time the least explored when you are talking about climate change and limiting climate change. So human rights basically affect every single human being on the planet. However, when we have these conversations, you don't really see much attention being paid to the human rights of the rights of human beings when climate change is discussed. So we have the Principle 1 of 1972 Stockholm Declaration of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment. And this is what he has to say. He says, man has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life. in an environment of equality that permits a life of dignity and well-being, and he bears a solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. Let me take out the keywords here. Man has the fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life. Adequate conditions of life. So when you look at where you are, your locality, would you say that you have been provided the adequate conditions of life? Would you say that the environment is of equality that permits a life of dignity and well-being? And we'll begin to talk about examples. We'll begin to give examples very soon. Would you say that where you are staying, that you are living a life of dignity because your environment permits it? Or would you say that your environment limits your ability to live a life of dignity and well-being? This is food for thought. So climate change has clear and immediate implications for the enjoyment of human rights, including inter alia, the right to life, the right to food, the right to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. So yes, there is a clear correlation, there is a clear link between climate change and human rights. And this is seen evidently from climate cooperation, the different climate cooperation arrangements that are springing up. We're going to have a session to speak on what international organizations are doing to tackle this. So it is clear that there is a link. And I'm going to speak briefly on 4 components that would guide our conversation. So these are still philosophical viewpoints. The first one is humanity. Our humanity. So human rights refer to the rights I mentioned earlier, the rights that persons have as human beings. And there are a number of different kinds of rights. So there's a philosopher called H.L.A. Hart, and he distinguished between special rights and general rights. He said that special rights are the rights that people have by virtue of some action that they and other party have performed. So an example of this would be maybe there's a contract that has been signed, and based on that contract, you're supposed to enjoy certain benefits, right? So that's one example. Or also by virtue of a special relationship you have, and that could be because you were born into one state, or you have, and then that makes you have the rights of citizenship. So those ones you would call special rights. But you can now contrast that with general rights, and those general rights are the rights that human beings or persons have by virtue of their humanity, and not because of a nation or a state that they were born into. So places like in the global north, like say Canada, if you are born in Canada, you become a Canadian and you enjoy all the rights of Canadians. And you would not say that the rights of Canadians are somewhat equal to the rights of someone who was born in a country like, say, Oman, right? Because as a Canadian, based on that passport, you can travel to hundreds of countries in the world, but you may not have that privilege with by being born in some other country, maybe in the global south. So those are special rights. But in his explanation, general rights are the ones that is independent of where you are born, who you are, but by virtue of being a human being, you enjoy those rights. And that is where that can give you an understanding of what human rights basically means. Also, we're going to talk about moral thresholds. So when you look at moral thresholds, it's basically a threshold below which people should not fall. Is like the most basic moral standards for which people are entitled to. The most basic. Like every human being you meet, there is a basic standard of decency you owe to them. That dignity that should be accorded to them, regardless of what they've done. You meet somebody, you have to give that person that basic decency, right? So when we understand what that threshold is, it's very important, and the conversation on climate change builds on that. So there's someone who is called Henry Shue, and he says that basic rights are the morality of the depths. They specify the line beneath no one is allowed to sink. But when you look at our world today, you see that increasingly people are sinking below these lines. Sorry, most of the things I'm saying are not up the slides. I see some people talking about the slides not moving. When I want to delve into the slides, then I would ask that the slides move. So please bear with me. Just pay attention to what I'm saying. Thank you very much. So there is a line where you are not, below which you should not sink. But increasingly we find that human beings are sinking below this line or this moral threshold for which we shouldn't cross. And these are due to some climatic factors. There's also the principle of universal protection, which represents entitlements for each and every individual to certain minimum standards of treatment. And then there is another one called lexical priority. So lexical priority generally means that human rights take priority over moral values. I'm going to give an instance. In a country, a government is concerned about increasing their efficiency or maybe promoting happiness, right? And then they begin to undertake projects to increase efficiency or productivity of the economy because it has it brings about greater good, or like a social good rather. That is fantastic. But if they are doing it at the expense of human rights, it's a no-no. And that's what lexical priority has to say, that human rights take priority over moral values. So if for any reason there is a clash between your moral values and human rights, violating human rights is a no-no. So in summary, we can say that human rights specifically or specify the minimum moral thresholds by which all individuals are entitled simply by virtue of their humanity, and which override all other moral values. All right, so now we can start to talk about climate change and human rights. If you could move the slides to the next one. Okay. So basically we're going to, from this, understand the concept of climate change and its impacts on human rights. We're going to see the intersection between climate change and human rights in the African context, develop strategies to integrate human rights principles into climate change policies and practices, and then we'll enhance knowledge on international and regional frameworks related to climate change and human rights. Next slide, please. Yeah, next slide as well, please. Next. Yeah, so we've discussed the science of climate change. The next one. Thank you. Yeah. So now we can start to talk about the different rights that are somewhat compromised due to climate change. And this is why I want us to be as engaging as we can. So the first one is right to life. And climate change is a threat to the lives of so many people. So when you look at climate change and the effects which we spoke about earlier on, things like hurricanes, droughts, wildfires, you see that these are detrimental to the lives of human beings. They are detrimental to the lives of human beings. And I want us to draw connections or give examples of situations that you can recall that brought about like a threat to the lives of people, maybe in your region, maybe I can start. In my region, in 2012 in Nigeria, there was a big flooding, and about 30-something states in Nigeria were flooded, and a lot of lives were lost. I come from a riverine community, and I know what my people suffered in terms of people who were lost and also properties that were destroyed, and that was directly due to the impacts of climate change. So if you could state in the chat where you are and something that you recall that happened that put a threat, or that was a threat to the lives of people, please, you could share. I see Elsie saying floodings are rampant in Ghana. Okay, thank you so much for sharing.
Sorry, Ifeanyi.
Yeah.
So I also feel that that some of us might actually want to speak from a personal place. Can I just ask your permission to allow some of us, if you like to speak, to just in 30 seconds to what our facilitator has just asked? Please just indicate by raise of hands. We'll allow you to speak. So while we do that, okay, so I'll just ask that. So let me just stop sharing. And two people have, so as many as we can that want to speak to that, please, let's just go on. I'll allow Ruby to make a comment or question about that. And please don't forget that you can use your Q&A feature to ask specific question, not questions like what is climate change and human rights. Specific questions that can trigger our understanding of the topic and actually provide solutions in real time. So let's have Ruby in 30 seconds.
Greetings, everybody. I would like to comment one of the impacts that I was personally affected. I live slightly in the rural areas of Chongwe, and there's a stream that passes to the main road. So during our last rainy season, that stream busted open, and not even cars would pass. So now we are now seeing the impacts of climate change threatening lives, and that's the only access out from the village area where I live to town. There's no other road that leads out of town, and you would find young children trying to pass that stream that busted, but you are able to tell that, you know what, no matter what happens, lives will still be lost if we do not take precautions or try and build a better bridge to access certain communities that are affected with the rivers that dry up, seasonal rivers. I think there's a lot that needs to be done with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ruby, for sharing. Yeah.
Okay. So let's have Richard Larison. Yeah, I know your name is like an alias. I know this is Richard Larison. Yeah, Richard, let's have you in 30 seconds. Hello, Richard.
Yeah, we can hear you, but your voice is a bit faint.
Yeah, can I?
Okay.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Just to add to the topic of the matter, and from Ghana, in the northern part of Ghana here, we have a range of scarcity when it comes to access to water. And the dry season, for instance, you could see indigenous from various communities sharing water with animals, and so this is a result of the change in the patterns of rainfall, and it's affecting them so much. And look, driving away from water, we can also talk about food. There are cost of food. When you look at the price of food in the northern part of Ghana, I wouldn't even say northern part, but ranging to the whole country, you could see that there is a rise in food, especially grains. And so those are the stuff they also depend on to earn a living. And so due to climate change, the patterns of the rainfall has really affected them, and it's something that is really impacting the people in the northern sector. And so this is just one of the point I want to add. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. So let's allow Olaide from Nigeria to speak. 30 seconds also. Olaide, you can unmute and.
All right, thank you very much, Mayowa. Thank you, and the faculty. Yeah, what I experienced here, I'm joining the call from Ilorin, Kwara State, that's not central Nigeria. Yeah, I observed that the state government want to do a road around 5 kilometers, and then the road supposed to be 10 months. It was abandoned, and now it's not possible. People that have to do business in that environment, people cannot access their building and what have you again. So in that case, the rights of the citizen have been tampered with in the place of government saying they want to do something, and coupled with all this climate change and the flood there and there, a lot of things happen in that environment. And now after 2 years, the citizens are now protesting, and the government is now responding to justify why all that happened. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Olaide.
Okay, do you still have time for one more person?
Yeah, we can take 2 more people.
Okay, so I have Mohammed Sanusi Mustafa on the call, and then yeah, okay, so Mohammed, you're on. Then after that, Smith Wokochan will continue with the class.
Okay, hello sir, good morning everyone. Thank you for the wonderful lecture delivered this morning. Sir, I am from Yobe State, northern part of Nigeria. There was heavy flood that happens last year in Gishwa local government of Yobe State. And the thing is is very terrifying to the extent that many people have lost their lives, jobs, as well as property. And to date that I'm talking to you now, sir, so many people are still suffering from that particular flooding. So that's what I can say for now. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. It's short and straight to the point. So the last person will be Smith Wokocha. Hello, Smith. Yeah, it's still morning. Yeah, good morning, Smith. You can unmute your mic and take it up. Okay, if Smith is not able to. Yeah, okay.
All right. Thank you, Mayowa. Sorry, I was muted all this while. And thank you, Ifeanyi, also for this amazing facilitation so far. Okay, my question quickly is that my name is Smith Mokocha. I'm coming from the Niger Delta region. Not to re-emphasize on it, but we all know we have a situation here about the oil spillage and the likes, going inland and even other areas of the Niger Delta where you have erosion and the likes. And sometimes these people, they come up, to voice up, they've even written petition, done a whole lot of things in that regard, that even UNEP has been involved and so, but no tangible result has been shown. So how will they really, enforce their right for government to take action, like visible action, and other international communities? Thank you.
I like that question, very specific, because we all go through this issue, right? So it's actually important for us to, in this class, prefer solution. How can we hold governments and those that are supposed to be accountable? How can we hold them accountable for ensuring that our human rights are respected, essentially?
Okay. Thank you so much, Mayowa, for facilitating that conversation or those comments that were made. And thank you all for sharing your viewpoints. Smith Wokocha, also thank you for that question. I would like us to revisit the question towards the end when we begin to talk about the solutions, but that's really vital and important for our conversation. And just to speak on all you have said so far, you see that those who spoke, who had the privilege to speak on and share their own perspectives, were from different countries, even those in the same country, come from different regions, but you see that in one way or the other, human rights are affected due to their particular context. And you saw that there are some people who spoke about flooding, serious flooding. Others spoke about food security. Others spoke about drought. So you see that climate change is kind of multifaceted. The effects are multifaceted and affects us in different ways. And ultimately, it boils down to the threat to life. Threat to life and security. The example I gave earlier on was about the Lake Chad region, where you see insecurity coming up due to climate change related issues. And this insecurity directly leads to the loss of lives. There are people who have had their lives and properties lost because of raids, because of kidnapping, and all the social vices that are a product of insecurity. And everything has climate change as an underlying factor. Threat to life, those who lost their lives in the floodings and lost their lives due to severe hunger directly are affected by climate change. So you see, that is an impact that you can draw a clear parallel. We also have right to health, and I want to touch on this quickly. I'll touch on a few more rights and then we move on to the next thing. So right to health, the health of populations are threatened due to climate change. And let me draw a parallel for you to understand. So in the tropical regions where you have Nigeria and a lot of countries represented on this call, they are susceptible to diseases like malaria, fever, dengue fever. Maybe in places like Brazil, you have dengue fever and the rest of it. And this is because the vectors that carry these diseases find the climate friendly for their growth and development. So in humid areas, in areas that the temperature is favorable, they can lay their egg, grows to larva pupa and becomes mosquito, and these vectors feast on their hosts, which are human beings. And as they feast on the host, of course, plasmodium is released, and of course that leads to malaria. And a lot of people die from the effects of malaria. Of course, Hasty Health Initiative would know a whole lot about the effects of malaria on the health of people. And of course, Hasty focuses on health related issues. So this is not something that is far-fetched for the organization. A lot of people die from this. But mind you, climate change means that regions where we have been known for being cold or being temperate are now increasingly warming as well. That simply means the area where these vectors can develop is increasing. And what does that mean? It means that the net for people who can be affected by these diseases is widening. So if you had like about 2.5 billion, I'm just giving figures now, 2.5 billion people who could be affected by malaria in say 2000, in year 2000, because of climate change, that is increasing. It may now be about 5-point-something billion because the net is increasing. And as these vectors are spreading, these diseases are spreading. So it has a direct impact on climate change. A lot of people are suffering. And also, when flooding comes, infrastructures are destroyed. like health centers in communities are destroyed. There are diseases that are also spread, waterborne diseases that come about because of climate change impacts. And as hospitals are destroyed and more people get sick, what happens? It leads to death. So the right to health is threatened directly due to the impact of climate change. When we talk about rights to food, someone mentioned on the call how the prices of food are increasing on the daily basis in Ghana, in northern Ghana, because of drought. I think someone also mentioned Kenya as well. I think that Kenya has been suffering drought for a while now, and that simply means there's pressure on food prices. Is leading to economic crisis in those countries, and the food prices increasing. How many people can afford food now because of drought, right? And these issues are kind of interlinked. So because of security challenges as well, food prices are increasing. People can't go to farm to produce, and security is impacted by climate change. So you see how these cross-cutting issues have a wide impact on society and on our human rights. So it's clear, rights to water as well. You have places that experience water scarcity and the quality of water isn't great because of climate change, either because there's no rainfall. Places like Ethiopia, places like Sudan, places like Libya, Kenya, they are experiencing, Madagascar, experiencing severe drought. So what happens to the water quality there? It reduces. And right to water is a fundamental human right. If we want to talk about right to housing, how many people have lost homes due to climate-related disasters? How many people have been displaced from their communities due to climate-related disasters? When this flooding comes, people have to leave, people have to move to higher ground. Those in the higher ground who were indigenous now are under pressure because more people are coming to where they are. Governments under pressure to produce enough housing to meet the needs of the people. So this right to shelter is compromised, and that is what due to climate change. So there are so many rights that we are losing access to due to the impacts of climate change. Now, the next thing I want to do is to focus on two key issues that we need to discuss when you're looking at climate change from a human rights perspective. I'm going to ask a question, and I need you all to interact. The first question is climate change exclusively a political issue and not a legal one? That's the first question. Is climate change exclusively a political issue and not a legal one? And the second question is, do we have human rights obligations to future generations, given that they will bear the long-term and irreversible consequences of climate change? Do we have human rights obligations to future generations, considering that they will bear the long-term consequences of climate change? So I would like to hear your thoughts. The first question is climate change exclusively a political issue and not a legal one? Secondly, do we owe the future generation that human rights obligation, considering that they are going to bear the long-term consequences of climate change? I'd like to hear your thoughts. You can raise your hands. You could share in the comments. Olaide, please, you can unmute your mic and speak.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kisley. Yeah, one, human rights is a legal because United Nations have enshrined that. So it has legal backing. Okay. But we need political way to enforce and implementing existing policy as we have in Nigeria. Second one, we have a legal obligation to protect the earth and ensure that we take action. Even against, as we know that in developing country, we are struggling to even meet up with the goal as against 2030. But nevertheless, when we take action, we have the obligation to take action so that the future generation can look back and say, thank you for starting the action. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Olaide, for contributing. I see a lot of comments. Umar is saying for the first one, it's not just exclusively a political issue, but it's also a legal one. Second one is also saying that the human right, we owe an obligation. So I'm mainly seeing no for the first one. Lisa is saying it is a component of both policy and legal factors. And yes, we have human rights obligation to future generations. Adebimpe is saying it is more of a legal issue. Okay, thank you all so much for your contributions, and I'm glad that a lot of people are seeing things from this perspective. Of course, we entertain everyone's perspective. If you have a contrary view, you also have the floor to share your views, and then we can examine it together. Is there any other person who would like to speak before I weigh my own thoughts? Okay. Thank you very much. So in terms of if it is exclusively a political issue and not a legal issue, okay, before we go ahead, can you give me case studies? I see a lot of people saying no. So if you could give case studies, maybe country-based case studies that you could use to justify your reasons, that could also help make the conversation a bit more robust. Any case study, anyone want to highlight or spotlight any case study to justify your reason for saying no? Please feel free. It's a conversation. Remember, I mentioned earlier, it's a conversation. It's not really structured.
So if you don't, sorry to butt in, Ifeanyi. So if you'd love to let us know more about what you just typed in, you can just go ahead to raise your hands, and we'll relinquish the mic to you. I saw Smith indicated earlier that so maybe that was a mistake. Smith, you'd like to chime in something? So 30 seconds so that we have others contribute. So Smith, you're gonna mute your mic if you like to say something to that. All right. Okay, while we wait for other people, hope you know it's a two-way street, right? So we want to know if we're getting across, right? And I know we're coming from different experience, different background, and we have personal stories to this issue. So to the question, so I don't know if Ifan, can you go over the question again?
Okay, so the question is climate change exclusively a political issue and not a legal one? That's the first question. And the second one is, do we have human rights obligations to future generations? That's the short question, basically. The short version of the question.
Okay. All right. So while we wait for comments and things like that, I think we can just continue.
Okay, thank you very much. So for the first question, I personally think it's a mix of both. It's not just a political issue, because if it were just to be a political issue, then it would be the prerogative of politicians to decide whether to act on climate change or not. And we can see in the past 10 years, we see the rise of political or climate movements that have a political dimension. You look at Germany, you see the Green Party rising. You also see different places, different youth uprisings. You have Extinction Rebellion. You have different movements coming up, putting pressure on political figures to take action. So that simply means that if it were to be exclusively a political issue, it will only be dependent on politicians and political movements before action can be taken. However, when you bring in the legal dimension to it, when there are laws that have been ratified and there are conventions that are backed by laws, it simply means that whoever comes in finds these arrangements binding, and they just have to live by it and continue in that trajectory. I'm going to give an instance. So the climate change should not just be a political issue. In the United Kingdom, a few prime ministers ago, Boris Johnson had a 10-point plan for how to achieve the climate goals of the United Kingdom. And the goals, the plans were backed, like they want to hit net zero by 2050. And that plan basically showed how they were going to achieve it. And then Boris left, another prime minister came in, and then another one came in, that's the current one. And just in the news recently, you see that he's trying to water down those commitments. However, they are backed by law, right? I'm also going to give another example. In the United States of America, the president, Trump, pulled out of the Paris Agreement. And when he pulled out of that agreement, United States were not contributing, were not doing anything, were not taking any action as far as climate change was concerned to reduce the impact of climate change. And then he left, and the new president that came in returned back to the Paris Accord. So you see that it should not just remain within the purview of a political issue or a political conversation. There is need for it to be backed by law. If not, the action that will be taken, climate action that will be taken, would be based on the whims and caprices of political figures. And that's not what we want. So we want a system whereby there is legal backing for climate change issues, because that's the only way we can be assured that collectively as a people, we are taking concrete action and moving forward, not taking one step forward and taking 2 steps back. I hope that is clear. So for the second question about if we have an obligation to future generations. So for me to answer that question, I would like to say something about the non-identity problem. So there was a philosopher called Derek Parfit in the 1980s who posed a philosophical challenge. And what he was saying is that our current actions affect the identities of those who will live in the future. Our current actions will affect the identities of those who will live in the future. So let me give an example. The way in which we live today, such as where we are and what we study and what we work, who we work with and what we are working on, will affect who we meet and when we will have children. And that also kind of has an implication on what kind of children are born. Is there an agreement? Do you agree with that point? What we are doing today, where we are working, the environment we find ourselves has an impact on where or the kind of children would have, the lifestyle of the children and all of that. Do you agree with that? So let's say you find yourself in an environment where you go abroad to study and you are in the MIT and you're surrounded by very wealthy people. There are high chances that the person who's going to be your partner would come from that circle, and ultimately that will affect the life trajectory of your children. I see a lot of agreements. Okay, so that's the point he was making. And he was now stating that it appears to be a paradox that if these future children were to blame us for our neglect of the climate problem, since the actions that led to the climate problem are exactly the same actions that allow these individuals to exist. So basically, he's saying you cannot pick and choose. The things we are doing today contributed to you being born, right? in this situation you find yourself. Those things that we were doing at the same time contributed to the climate problem. So you cannot look at us as the previous generation and say, oh, you did this, you did that, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. And that led to the creation of the climate problem, because that also led to their creation. Is anybody catching my drift? So basically, you can't pick and choose. Please, I want to see some reactions in the chat if you're catching my drift. So for Parfit, the philosopher, he said that it does not make sense to say that the specific future individuals have rights relating to us taking actions that would have led to these individuals not existing. Because those things that we did, those places we were, those industries we worked in, directly led to your creation and also directly led to the creation of the climate problem. So that is what we call the non-identity problem. And this was a theory by Derek Parfit in 1980s. So that's one viewpoint. But there is a contrary one, and that states that when you look at, so Parfit was looking at an individual, right? But when you look at the collective, it kind of destroys this argument. As a group, at a group level, there is a difference between a potential group of individuals coming into the world in an environment with a stable climate and a potential group of individuals coming into the world in an environment where the tipping point of climate catastrophe has been reached. So from a collective standpoint, Parfit's paradox disappears, allowing future generations to possess human rights. So when you now look at a group like a whole generation, you cannot now start saying, okay, this person had this context, this person had this context. As a generation, they are coming into a world that has been badly devastated and badly affected by climate change because of the actions and the inactions of the previous generation. So it is not left to the context of one person, one individual, one family anymore. It is collective. So when you look at it from the collective standpoint, that argument is destroyed. And that simply means that the current generation has an obligation to protect the rights, the human rights of future generations. And this is the concept that is known as intergenerational equity. I don't know how many people have heard about that. Intergenerational equity. The fact that because you are living in this planet, you would misbehave or do things that contribute to the climate catastrophe and that will affect a future generation. That is not intergenerational equity. Intergenerational equity is ensuring that we do things in a way that the future generation will also be preserved. So basically, not depleting our resources, not promoting climate change so that future generations can also see and enjoy the earth as we know it. So we have that obligation, we have that duty, we have that debt to the future generations to ensure that we preserve the earth and we reduce the effects of climate change so that they can also live. I hope that is clear. Okay, I see a comment by Sani. It says, an old man answered a young person that was planting a perennial tree, not because he would live long to enjoy it, but because those ones he enjoyed in his lifetime was planted by his predecessor. Yes, that's a very good point. So if you are conscious of intergenerational equity, if you have that mindset, it's going to affect your actions, knowing that the things we enjoy today were because of the considerations of previous generations. So definitely you have to be considerate of future generations in your actions and inactions to ensure that the climate change is reduced to its barest minimum. Okay, now that we have mentioned that, I think we can move on to talk about some communities or some groups of people, marginal groups that are affected by vulnerability. So that's the next slide. So climate change has a significant impact on vulnerable populations, such as women, children, and indigenous people. So when we were talking, we talked about some of the effects of climate change. Now imagine a community that is flooded. What do you think would happen, or who do you think is most at risk of drowning or of dying? It will be those who are vulnerable. It will be children who cannot take care of themselves, because in such situations, is usually, before somebody can get reoriented, it's usually all man for himself, and the men would most likely be the ones who can survive it. Children would be at risk. Women will also be at risk. So these are people who we classify as marginalized groups. And it's important to pay attention to these marginalized groups when you are making arrangements for climate adaptation and mitigation. You have to consider what you are doing to ensure that these marginalized groups are protected, because they are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. We've talked about women. Of course, women are disproportionately affected. They don't have access to as much resources as men. They are usually the ones that are the burden bearers for families in terms of taking care of the family, preparing food, and all of that. They are the ones who bear that brunt in many traditional African communities. So they are most likely going to be affected. When you look at cooking in the house, for instance, you see that it's the women that are usually responsible for getting the fuel. In places where they have to get firewood, women have to travel long miles to get the firewood or the charcoal or whatever to prepare food, and they are usually very much affected by climate change. Children obviously are affected as well, because in the effect of in the event of a climate catastrophe, a lot of children are displaced. You just turn on the TV and read the news, and in places like Haiti, where there's an earthquake, or when there is the cyclones and all of that, in places there are flash floods, see how many children are displaced. Even when there are wars, look at how many children get displaced and lose their parents and need care. So these are vulnerable and marginalized groups. Also, indigenous people as well are affected, because they rely on the land and the natural resources for their livelihood. They are people who are kind of they are not open to the world. Let me use that language. So they depend on their land, they depend on their resources. So when there is a climate impact on their land and resources, where does that leave them? They become really vulnerable. So we need to pay attention to them when designing policies, or when working towards climate adaptation projects or climate mitigation projects. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the intersection of climate change and human rights in Africa, some of these things we have already touched. So we've talked on food insecurity, giving instances about places like Madagascar, places like Libya and Kenya, due to the flooding, due to the drought, they are losing resources. Feeding is becoming a problem. And according to the FAO, between 2017 and 2019, over 73 million people in Africa faced acute food insecurity due to climate-related events such as drought, floods, and storms. Just put that number into context. 73 million people. 73 million people. That's a whole lot. That's a whole lot. So it just shows how much the impact of climate change is affecting people. The World Bank also estimates that by 2025, half of the African population will face water scarcity due to climate change. We talked a little on vector-borne diseases. We also, the World Health Organization rather, estimates that by 2030, climate change will cause an additional 250 deaths per year from malaria, malnutrition, diarrhea, and heat stress in Africa. So these are some statistics that just go to buttress the points which we have collectively made so far. And let's look at the next slide. So analyzing the impact of climate change on African countries, of course, we know that Africa is a place that is blessed with so many resources, wildlife species, we have a whole lot of that. But of course, these species are also under threat, even though it's not directly linked to human rights, but it has an impact as well on human rights, because there are some of these animals that human beings depend on for meat or for ecosystem services, right? Some of the animals, like there's the African civet. Let me give an example. The African civet is an animal that helps in pollination. Let me say pollination, for want of a better word. So it swallows the seeds of really tasty fruits, the ones that are the best. It's very selective. It swallows these seeds, and in its excreta, it plants them, right? So that way it is planting trees, like trees that are good for food, trees that are very good, that produce good fruit. So human beings directly benefit from these animals, but climate change is making it difficult for animals like this to thrive in its natural ecosystem. So when ecosystems are affected, it also has an impact on human rights, even though it may not be direct. So many countries have developed national change strategies and have ratified the Paris Agreement, which aims to limit global temperature increases to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And implementation of these strategies has been hampered by a lack of resources, institutional capacity, and political will. Yes, like I was saying, if there is no political will, if it is left to be just a political issues, then we'll be too dependent on political will to actually take action. But if it leaves the realm of being a political issue and becomes a legal issue, then it becomes more binding. Thank you, Leah. Yes, it helps in seed dispersal. I also see some statistics being shared. Ruby, thank you. Almost 160 million children are exposed to increasingly severe and prolonged droughts. The education of around 38 million children is disrupted each year by the climate crisis. Thank you so much for sharing that, and that is true. So you see that the impact is far-reaching. So at this point, I would like to speak on some of the international responses, spotlighting what is being done. We talked about the Paris Agreement already. So let's see what the response of the global community has been so far to human rights and climate change. So the first one I would like to speak on is the Paris Agreement, which we've just touched on. And the purpose of the Paris Agreement is to strengthen the global response to climate change and limit global warming. And the reference it makes to human rights, if you read the document, the preamble acknowledges that there is an intrinsic relationship between climate change and human rights, and also it emphasizes the importance of considering human rights in climate action. Then we have the UNFCCC. So the UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the purpose of this body is to address issues related to climate change and its impacts. So different subsidiary bodies, sometimes you hear of SB 56, SB 57, different subsidiary bodies, meetings, and work programs under the UNFCCC. They address issues of human rights implications of climate change. An example would be the local communities platform, and also the indigenous peoples platform. And then many of us are also familiar with the SDGs. I think we had a session dedicated to the SDGs, which is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the purpose of this agenda is to address the global challenges, including climate change, poverty, inequality, environmental degradation, lack of access to electricity, and on and on. So there are different goals, and these goals are interwoven. So together they address issues of climate change and also address issues of human rights. Then we have the Human Rights Council resolutions. Let me just check the charts if anything new is coming in. Oh, good. I see the loss of the Kalahari hornbills. These are birds in arid zones. Okay, so due to their exposure to the heat, it's not sustainable for their breeding, so they are becoming extinct. So yes, that's an impact. Thank you very much for sharing, Ruby. So yeah, I was speaking on the different organization or global responses to the issue. So the Human Rights Council or resolutions, they have adopted several resolutions recognizing the adverse effects of climate change on the enjoyment of human rights, and have been calling for human rights-based approaches to climate action. Remember how we started the conversation? We talked about the different approaches, and then we spotlighted the human rights approach. They also have a special rapporteur on human rights and the environment. Then we have the IPCC. So the IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and they release assessments and reports from time to time that speak on the connection between human rights and climate change. So they provide that essential knowledge base for international climate policies. Then we have the international human rights treaties. Of course, we've talked about the right to a healthy environment. I spotlighted that earlier on when I talked about the Stockholm Declaration of the United Nations Conference on the Human Environment, how human beings have a fundamental right to freedom, equality, and adequate conditions of life in an environment of equality that permits a life of dignity and well-being, and he bears a solemn responsibility to protect and improve the environment for present and future generations. So we have that. And then we have different humanitarian and environmental initiatives, such as the Green Climate Fund. We have the Climate Action Network and a couple of others. So these are different initiatives to raise funds, to mobilize resources that tackle issues relating to climate change, protecting vulnerable populations and their rights, basically increasing climate action. And then we have indigenous peoples initiatives. There's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. They recognize their rights. I think I wanted to give an example when I was talking about the... just give me a minute. I was speaking about lexical priority. I wanted to give an example. So, and also draw our attention to the concept of climate justice. When I talked about lexical priority, I said that human rights generally take priority over moral values, such as increasing efficiency in a country, improving happiness, improving their GDP. Human rights take priority. And I don't know how many of you have come across the concept of a just transition when you're talking about energy transition. So the energy transition conversation has to do with shifting from the erstwhile polluting sources of energy and shifting to cleaner sources. So you are transitioning, and this is supposed to be a vehicle to accelerate the net zero targets, right? So when you reduce your emissions, you are standing a better chance of hitting those targets. However, the methodology is also important. A government cannot just come and tell you, oh, we want to build, say, a wind farm. I think Kenya has something like that, a wind farm. And because it's going to produce, say, 5 gigawatts of electricity that is clean, displacing 5 gigawatts of electricity from fossil-based sources. That's fantastic. I mean, at the surface level. But what if they say that for them to do that, they have to displace an indigenous community? What if they have to displace these vulnerable people from their land, grab their land and pursue them? That adds an interesting twist to the conversation. Because while they are doing something that is good, it is infringing on the human rights of that indigenous community. So what lexical priority here is stating is that in that sense, because human rights are being violated, regardless of what the welfare is, there is a problem, and that's a flag. And those who advocate for climate justice, this is one of the solutions that we are going to highlight. Those who advocate for climate justice spotlight this, saying that you cannot build new, let me put it in the way, for those who are religious, you cannot put old wines in new bottles. You cannot continue, you cannot do the right thing upon a wrong foundation or upon existing methodology that is faulty. You can't do that because it is not just. The transition is not just. You have displaced people, you have infringed on their human rights because you want to score points, score political points and say, oh, as an organization, as a company, we are building wind farms here, we are doing this, we are doing that to ensure that we accelerate the energy transition. But that's on the surface, and that's what you're telling the whole world. But what has happened in the community where you are citing those projects? When you talk about carbon capture and all those kind of things, when you say that, what happens to the local farmers that you displace from their indigenous lands because you want to plant trees to score carbon credit points? What happens to them? So why we're having this conversation is to bring your consciousness to that, so that when you talk about net zero, when you talk about, of course, that's the purpose of this fellowship, to understand the conversation. When you are engaging with stakeholders, you know the things or the areas to pay attention to such that we are building in a just way, in a way that is equitable to every person. When you want to carry out such projects, there are methodologies to go about it. There needs to be an environmental impact assessment. What is the impact of these actions we want to take on the environment? What happens to the ecosystem? What happens to the flora and the fauna that are indigent to this place? A human rights impact assessment. What happens to the people? Are we infringing on their rights? Are these people, do they have ancestral links to this land? What would happen to the indigenous people of this community when we displace them? Are you making arrangements for that? Are you thinking about that? So that's where we need to actually focus our mindset on. And when we have these conversations, it kind of helps us. I see Lucy has dropped a case study. Thank you, Lucy. Say a similar case happened in Kenya in 1980, where indigenous people were displaced to pave way to develop Masinga Dam for hydroelectric power. They have never been compensated. And that's a big problem. That's a big problem. So when we have these conversations, we need to look at the right things and ask the right questions so that people don't just greenwash and make promises and look good in front of the media and say, oh, we're taking climate action, but they are causing mayhem and causing havoc to communities and infringing on the human rights of people. Okay, yeah, I don't know if anybody has something to say or a point to chime in. I think this would be a good juncture to entertain some thoughts, some remarks. Sunny, I see your hand is up. Please, you could speak. Yeah, Mr. Sani Mohammed, please, you have the floor.
Yeah, okay, please unmute your mic. And
Okay, can you hear me?
so 30 seconds, please.
Okay, am I audible there?
Yes, you are. You are.
Okay, thank you very much. I recently came across two pollutants that I'm not very familiar with, and during this course, I realized that most of the causes of climate change has to do with one or two pollutants in our environment. So I came across light and sound pollution. So I'm wondering, does this has a relationship with climate change? Please, that's just a question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Any more contribution? I'm going to respond to your question, Sani. Any other contributions?
Can I just also ask? I'm sure somebody said something like that in the Q&A. Something about bringing. So while we have some understanding of our own fundamental human rights and what we should be asking for and what should actually be our rights, I am also thinking about people that have been marginalized, that their lives have now been affected by the activities of men, the oil companies, and all of them. And they're actually in the rural region. Like I made an example of while I was serving in a place that is supposed to be the oil producing region of Ondo State, right? And their means of livelihood completely taken over. There is not even one industry that can support young people coming out from schools and things like that. So my question is, how can the people there and the residents, how can they kind of so not just compensation from from a financial term, how can they kind of reclaim is there anything that can be done to more like remediate the whole situation? Have they lost their land forever? Is there anything that they can do to the government, to the private sector? Is there anything? I don't know if we are all if we understand or you can relate with this question. So in a place where the damage has been done and it continues to be done, is there any way that the people of that region can actually come back from the infringement of their human rights, essentially?
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe I can respond to that one immediately. Then I'll respond to Sani's question, and then we can address Smith's question that came in earlier. So for people who have lost their lands, what normally goes on is there is a compensation for them. There's a compensation because the government can choose to monetize it. So because we are getting you off your land, there's a huge inconvenience. So they kind of put a cost to it. I talked about the cost-benefit analysis earlier on. So the economic metrics that they use to value the inconvenience or value the the cost basically of these people being displaced. They also could carve out a special area for them and say, okay, we are moving you to this area and we are going to settle each of you. So compensation could come in different ways. But where there is a problem is when the government does not take active steps to reconcile or to ensure that these communities are fine. So that's where the problem actually is. I don't know if that is clear.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I know we'll still have further discussion on this, because it continues to happen, and I'm sure in many regions in Africa, especially now that is a very topical issue, and Africa is really trying to take itself back. It will continue to stay in the news, and I just thought about that.
Okay. Yeah, it's a valid point. It's a valid point, and you find these things happening in places where democratic processes are not strong, where rule of law is not enshrined. So people could just come and grab lands and go and get away with it. It also happens with companies, international companies coming. I think I read in the news recently that 10% of Liberia, the landmass of Liberia, has been bought by a company for some carbon credit projects or whatever. So these are land grabs that are being orchestrated and perpetrated against African people, against indigenous communities. They get away with it because the governments, they have the buy-in of the government, and these issues are not spotlighted as much as they should. So these are the problems. Sunny, I see your hand is up again. Or is it
Not that
hand? Is it an old hand? Okay, so
yeah, I think it was raised before.
Okay, thank you. So responding to Sunny's question about light pollution and sound pollution. So directly, I wouldn't say there is a link between light pollution and climate change. However, one thing you also need to consider is that light is powered by energy, right? So there is energy that is required to keep all these light bulbs on, right? And that energy, if it's produced by fossil fuels, is contributing to climate change. So in the air, when you talk about light pollution, places where you don't need light, you turn it off, and that way you are conserving energy. And as you're conserving energy, you are reducing the impact of climate change. So that's the linkage that the direct correlation I can see between light energy. Sound energy, also the same thing. Probably it's being powered by a source that's fossil based. So if you reduce it, you're reducing, and it's directly linked to energy efficiency, basically. So reducing how much you need or how much you use that you do not need reduces the overall impact on the environment. Okay, so to respond to Smith's question, which is about how people can enforce their rights. Yes, you can enforce your rights by joining. I think we're kind of getting to the end of the conversation now, and this is one of the ways you can take action. So to enforce your rights, you can join climate justice movements, build solidarity with other stakeholders who are fighting for different rights, come together and work together. Build movements. They are very powerful. They are very powerful in effecting change. You may think it doesn't do anything, but when you begin to speak about these issues, the consciousness of people becomes heightened, right? People have a good understanding. And when you find yourself in election years and people now have an understanding on the impact of climate change, and they begin to ask the politicians who are running for office, what are you going to do about this? What are you going to do about that? You see that it becomes a conversation that is at the fore, and elected officials become elected based on what they would do around issues that concern human rights, that concern climate change. And that is how citizen engagement can help. Climate justice movement. When I was at the COP in 2021, I joined one of those movements, and we were at the plenary and we were campaigning against the exploitation of the Niger Delta. Many of the oil and gas majors, they had representatives in those conversations, and they just came to speak big English to us, telling us about how they are building one wind farm here and there, but they continue to exploit places like the Niger Delta, continue to pollute heavily, and didn't care what the people in the Niger Delta were suffering. So we brought that consciousness to those conversations, those international conversations where the decision makers are showing everybody that what these people are saying is quite different from the realities on ground. And when you begin to do that at your own level, local level, at international level, wherever, drawing attention to this, you begin to shift that needle. And that's why we have this fellowship. The fellowship is to educate you and show you ways you can start up something. So you could have a climate advocacy project and draw attention of what's going on in your neighborhood to the entire country. And everybody sees the injustice that's going on in your country. And before you know it, everyone is talking about it. And then the parliamentarians have to discuss it at the floor of the National Assembly or whatever. And before you know it, becomes a national issue. And before you know it, funding and action begins. So these are some of the ways you can start. And for Smith's question, you may say that, okay, they've been doing this for so long, and you've had principal actors like Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was killed, and extrajudicial killings and all of that. But still, there are some wins, because today we are talking about the Ogoni cleanup. The UNEP has released a report. The courts in London and in The Hague are discussing these issues. And I think there was a victory recently, a few months ago. So because of the work of so many people, because of the advocacy of so many people, global attention is being drawn to the issues. And now we have sustainability conversation. Sustainability is also part of the conversation. So when companies are trying to get contracts, we now begin to look at your antecedents, look at what you've done before, what you stand for, and that kind of determines what contracts you get. So definitely advocacy goes a long way in resolving these challenges. It may be a long walk, but it's a walk to freedom. Taking the quote from Mandela, a long walk to freedom. It's a long walk, but it ultimately gets us there. It ultimately gets us there. And that's why we must take action, whether in the local community, using the resources you have, the digital resources on social media, talking about these things, putting it out there in the consciousness of people. And then by the time you know it, before you know it, you can galvanize enough support to that leads to more action around human rights preservation and also climate change, combating climate change. Yeah, I think we can call it a wrap. So the slides, I realized that the conversation may not have been strictly following the slides, but on the slides you have enough resources and it's going to be shared with you afterwards, so you can digest that. But I just want to leave room. I think we have just about a little over 10 minutes for further reflections on some of the key points that may have stood out to you, or some of the experiences that you may have that are concerned or that are linked to this conversation. I want us to talk about it, and also maybe if you're also thinking about projects that you could undertake, maybe you could also share and we can look at it together and see how this can help to solve the problem that we currently have facing us as far as human rights are concerned?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much, Ifeanyi. And we are all applauding here, and we are all really we've learned a lot from some of these documents on ground in Africa, trying to ensure that human rights is also being considered. I mean, one of the important things that you mentioned is striking a balance between development and also watching out for environment too, because you find in a lot of places, and you've talked about it, it's not just about bringing up or putting up infrastructures that really do not have a direct benefit to to the average man on the street. I mean, someone had talked about how certain roads were made or were constructed, and how it's just took over the lives of people, and people cannot move day by day and even do business, and a lot of these things, and for us young people, and for us that the future generation is going to be asking us what we did. It's important that we bring all these things to the fore. If I talked about us taking some comments on our project, I know we've gone through a number of the projects. Some of us are doing really have really good ideas. Of course, with just 2 or 3 weeks to complete an entire project, it can be, of course, constricting, but let's take it as one step at a time, right? And I mean, it's also the reason why I keep hammering on you to keep the proposals, right? Because you can use these proposals for to get support from larger organizations, grants, and of course you could even use it to start your activism, your advocacy, future projects. If we still have questions, we have a few minutes to beat. We gladly want to take your comments or question. Do we have anyone? Sunny, I see your hand. Do we have anyone from South Africa on the group on this call today? Someone from South Africa. I've heard a lot from our Nigerian friends. Someone from South Africa, from Rwanda, from Zambia. I'd like to hear us. Oh, okay. Ruby is from. Let me see now. I think Ruby is from Zambia. Yeah, I think Ruby is from Zambia. So if you are from South Africa, Rwanda, okay, Ghana. I've heard Richard. Richard is from Gambia. Is from Ghana. Oh, okay. Yeah, Yvonne. Yeah, okay, yes, of course. Okay, so I got it right. So Ruby is from Zambia. So if we still want to chime in something, say concerning the projects, so I'm still expecting feedback from us. So we're expected to submit the final draft of our projects today, or at the latest tomorrow. And that would help us to know those that are actually ready. The reason why I am also mentioning South Africa, of course, we've received a number of proposals from there. It's just one group that has not been able to, and have reached out both informally and using this opportunity to ask that if you've not submitted your project proposal, please ensure that you reach out to us, because part of your eligibility to become fellows here is that you attend these classes, and of course, you can use the information and the knowledge gained from these classes to apply, you apply it to, to the projects. It's our wish that at the end of this program, we have startups, enterprises, advocates, climate champions, community managers that are focusing on ensuring that our community, our society is more resilient, to climate change. If there are no questions, I think it's a good time to close today's session. Don't forget, we do this again on Thursday. On Thursday, it's going to be more interactive. You're going to be doing more of the talking, and one of the highlights that we want to see on Thursday is that you just give us a rundown of your learnings in the beginning of the program and how it has benefited you and how it has not benefited you, something like that. And, tell us what we can do better. On Thursday, we are also going to be talking about this topic, but from a different light, right? Just like we've been doing. So if you've been a participant in today's program, we also encourage you to invite friends, and basically, come and let us share some more ideas. We are not just going to be talking, we are going to be doing as youths. We are going to be doing a lot of this, program. I've also mentioned that if you have organizations, if you have startups, if you are thinking of going into the development space and you want to learn more about how to mobilize funds, this is a very good opportunity. If you already have a startup, this is also a very good opportunity. You can recruit volunteers from your country here, right? This is a very safe zone. It's a safe space where you can do this. You can also get more ideas about how to get funding from your country groups, from your project group members, and so many of these things. That is what I mean by networking and what we aim to achieve in youth networking. We have less than 5 weeks to spend together on this program, but we can make it very memorable. We can make it very rewarding to each and every one of us. We thank us all from the 6 countries. Big shout outs, big thanks to our facilitator. Thank you so much, Ifeanyi. I know you mentioned that you're actually in the middle of something, and we really want to appreciate that you made time available for us out of really, really no time. We really appreciate this, and we love you. We thank you. We appreciate you for doing this. I know I'll really be in touch. Of course, to catch up on your activities in the UK and all of that. Thank you very much, Ifeanyi.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Hesi, and thank you everyone for your audience. Hope to see you on Thursday again, and we can continue the conversation from there. Yeah, bye. All right, bye.
Thank you. All right, bye everyone. If you've not been able to fill out the attendance for today, please ensure you do this. We'll try as much as possible, because I know, because we are nice, right, to also drop in the attendance so that nobody would say that I came, I attended the class, but I wasn't, for one reason or the other, network and all of that, I wasn't able to do, because it's important that you fill in those attendance. It's important to us. If there's no other thing, let's carry on with our day. I wish us all a very pleasant day, fruitful week. Indeed. Bye everyone. Bye. And please don't forget to drop your insight. It's a very good opportunity for us to have something that we've taken away from the class. So let's share, let's discuss it in our country, groups. I like what the Kenyans are doing, and let's keep sharing opportunities. When you see opportunities and you feel that it will be beneficial to us, please feel free to share these opportunities on your group and in the Telegram platform, on the Telegram platform too. Please do this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. All right, I'm out.